Chapter 943. On Monday, in the meeting room of Xinyuan Group, the usual middle and senior management of Xinyuan were replaced, and the number of people was reduced by half. Tang Yu sat at the head of the table and listened to the finance manager's report on the financial results of the new quarter. The finance manager broke out in cold sweat. It was not easy to be a manager. He trembled and finally managed to say a few complete sentences. Suddenly, the door of the meeting room opened. It was Shen Lian who came in. She was dressed in Issey Miyake's white suit, which complemented her figure perfectly. Xiao Ran sat beside Tang Yu and thought to himself that it must have been tough on Shen Lian. She could still maintain such a perfect appearance even though she was missing a leg. Especially when she was wearing high heels. Didn't it hurt that part of her leg? Shen Lian walked in with a bit of pride. She raised her head and scanned the people inside. The corner of her mouth curled into a cold smile. There are many new faces here. Why? Did Xinyuan Group make such a big move in the past 2 years? Someone could not stand her rudeness and reprimanded her. President Shin, even if you are the president's fiancé, it is not convenient for President Shin to interfere in the internal affairs of Xinyuan Group. Moreover, everyone knew about this woman's scandals. She had so much fun outside and was even fooled by a disgusting man. How dare she come to Xinyuan Group to behave so presumptuously? Shen Lian sneered. Really? She threw a stack of documents to the manager. Open your eyes and look carefully. These are 20% shares of Xinyuan Group, and I am the owner. There was an uproar in the meeting room. So this was the case. They looked at Tang Yu in shock and doubt. Shen Lian smiled coldly. As the second largest shareholder of the company, I have the right to know the financial affairs of Xinyuan Group for the past 2 years. The finance manager was not sure and looked at Tang Yu. Tang Yu said calmly, sort it out and hand it to Director Shin. Shen Lian smiled triumphantly and smiled. I hope the management of Xinyuan Group will be responsible for my shares. In addition, I will be involved in the internal management of Xinyuan Group. She looked at Tang Yu. Is that okay? She was very domineering and everyone in the meeting room was unhappy. Where did this woman come from? What right did she have to behave so atrociously here? But Tang Yu replied calmly, of course. Then he said slowly, I will get Secretary Xiao to inform President Shin about the shareholders' meetings in the future. But Mr. Shin doesn't have a specific position in Xinyuan, so he doesn't need to attend the meetings. She does not have a specific position in the company, but she does not have a specific position. Of course, she could sell it, but with Xinyuan's current situation, who would be willing to pay that much for 20%? She would jump at any time. Shen Lian narrowed in thought. She looked Tang and looked at Tang Yu. Shen Tang of Tang Yu. Shen Tang, Shen Yu Shen Shi of. Shen Yu team, Yu, and Shen was of Xing. Yu. Shen of, but she could not figure out what was wrong. Tang Yu was still calm. He looked at Shen Lian and said, President Shin, you are thinking too much. I don't think President Shin needs to spread these untrue rumors when Xinyuan Group is in its most difficult period. Shen Lian was a little angry. Tang Yu, you know the truth. Is that so? Then may I ask, how did CEO Shin get this 20%? Tang Yu was calm and collected, unperturbed. Shen Lian could not say anything. She had indeed used underhanded means. Chapter 944. Tang Yu's tone was still very calm. Then CEO Shin can go outside and take a good look at the financial statements. He signaled to the finance manager with his eyes. The finance manager was startled and immediately expressed that he would cooperate fully. He was no longer in a disadvantageous position. Didn't this woman hold 20% of the shares? Wasn't she just looking at Xing Yuan's money? The company's performance had been so bad for the past 2 years. Let him have a good chat with her. He was sure that when CEO Shen went out, her face would turn black. Sure enough, after 2 hours, Shen Lian's face turned black as he wished. Xing Yuan had become an empty shell. Except for some real estate, those subsidiaries and projects had disappeared without a trace. The most important thing was that it was done flawlessly. After Tang Yu's meeting, Shen Lian went to the CEO's office. Xiao Ran looked at her and felt a little awkward. Tang Yu was standing there making a cup of coffee for himself when he heard a sound outside. Secretary Xiao, let CEO Shen in. Xiao Ran then let Shen Lian in, but she still hated Shen Lian. Everyone in City B knew about the news the night before, but Shen Lian still held on to this position and refused to come down. What kind of character did she have to be to not care about this? She was sure that CEO had not touched the runaway lotus, so there must be a lot of men around Shen Lian. Otherwise, she would not be so calm about this matter. She thought, CEO must know about it too. He didn't care, so he didn't care. Shen Lian actually couldn't see through all this and was destined to lose completely. When a man was wary of you and spent 2 years to set up a trap, yet you still foolishly persisted, then you were really stupid. Shen Lian walked in and stood quietly behind Tang Yu. His back was still as tall and slender as before, suitable for women to lean on. Tang Yu picked up the exquisite coffee cup and took a sip. Do you want a cup? Shen Lian's eyes were a little hot. She did not move forward, but kept 2 steps away from him. Her voice was very soft. Tang Yu, I've never liked coffee. But, did you forget? He was still holding the cup of coffee in his hand. He lowered his eyes and smiled. He put the cup of coffee on the table and slowly turned around. He looked at her. At that moment, he was the CEO of Xing Yuan, and she was the one who wanted to snatch Xing Yuan away. Even if she had never wanted Xing Yuan. But now, she was his enemy. Shen Lian threw down the financial report and said in a fierce voice, Xing Yuan, you've emptied it, haven't you? Moreover, she couldn't even see where the money went. She had completely exploited the loophole of the law. This shocked and enraged her. Tang Yu's thin lips curled up slightly. Shen Lian, do you think you can get any useful information from me so that you can record it as proof? She was too naive. Shen Lian's expression changed. She narrowed her eyes and glared at him. She glared at this heartless man. She didn't understand why he was so heartless towards her. She was infatuated with him, but in the end, he only had Pei Chi-Chi in his heart. Shen Lian choked. I know you're concerned about what happened in the news. That person was talking nonsense. I've never known him, and more importantly, she didn't finish her sentence because she was embarrassed. It wasn't that she didn't feel guilty. How could someone as noble as Tang Yu accept someone who had been humiliated by such a man? Tang Yu looked at her sad face. There wasn't much expression on his face. She couldn't see through him. Chapter 945. At that moment, Shen Lian's face was ashen. He didn't care because he didn't care about her. Not to mention one man, even if there were 10 or 100 of them, he wouldn't care. She closed her eyes and gritted her teeth. Tang Yu, are you really not afraid that I will sell my shares of Xing Yuan? Tang Yu smiled. Who do you think will buy it now? He told her very seriously that Xing Yuan's assets would be reduced again. In other words, the cake that she owned would become smaller and smaller. Shen Lian laughed when she heard that. She laughed at herself for being too naive. How could she believe his words? How could she think that she could control this man with 20% of Xing Yuan's shares? When she was intoxicated, he had secretly done so much. It was really good, very good. The man she fell in love with was so ruthless. He didn't give her any leeway. She gritted her teeth and smiled gently. Tang Yu, have you forgotten that I am the one who changed Pei Chi-Chi's bone marrow? Also, don't think that I don't know that her ovulation period is 3 years. Are you sure that she won't have any abnormalities in the next 1 year or so? She smiled strangely. At that time, it won't be a matter of you begging me. It won't be a matter of 20% of Xing Yuan's shares. She had been fooled by him once, so she wouldn't be fooled by him again. These 2 days, she thought for a long time and finally understood the reason why Tang Yu didn't break off the engagement with her. Other than the 20% of Xing Yuan's shares, there was another reason. It was because of that bitch, Pei Chi-Chi. Shen Lian thought about it and finally went to the hospital to ask a doctor. The result was what she had expected. What Tang Yu kept was not her, but her bone marrow. She felt very sad. The more devoted he was to Pei Chi-Chi, the more cruel he was to her. Tang Yu still stood there quietly without much expression on his face. Shen Lian's confident expression was a little flustered. Could it be that she had guessed wrongly? However, she had been fooled by him too many times, so she would rather believe that he was bluffing. Shen Lian pursed her lips and raised her head with tears in her eyes. No matter how much I love you, it's useless, right? No matter what, you will only love Pei Chi-Chi, right? Tang Yu didn't answer her. He just turned around and said, Shen Lian, we can actually reconcile. Before he finished, she shouted in excitement, why should I reconcile with you? Tang Yu, I've done so much for you. Shouldn't you repay me? As she spoke, she laughed mockingly. How could you give yourself to someone else? You want to keep yourself for Pei Chi-Chi. Suddenly, she placed her finger on her abdomen and chuckled. Tang Yu, if I tell the media that I'm pregnant, how do you think Pei Chi-Chi will look at you? How are you going to deal with it in the future? Do you want to abandon me? Tang Yu's gaze was fixed on her. If I were you, I wouldn't use such an extreme method. Are you afraid? Shen Lian chuckled. Tang Yu, you forced me to do this. After saying that, she turned around and left. Tang Yu poured himself another cup of coffee and drank it slowly. He really hadn't expected Shen Lian to do this, but she was just digging her own grave by doing this. He stood there, looking out of the French windows and smiled slightly. Shen Lian returned to Jean Taihe. The moment she entered the office, she lost her temper and swept the documents on the desk all over the floor. She was so angry. She narrowed her eyes indignantly. Chapter 946. As Shen Lian's personal secretary, she felt as though she was about to suffocate. She had to spend all her time with a schizophrenic person. She was going to become schizophrenic as well. Shen Lian raised her head and said agitatedly, help me leak the news to the media. Tell them that I'm pregnant. Her secretary, Li Sha, was a little surprised. She asked instinctively, whose child is it? At this moment, Shen Lian was so fragile that she couldn't be agitated. When she heard Li Sha say that, she immediately took the paperweight from the table and threw it at her. Luckily, Li Sha dodged in time. Otherwise, her head would have been broken. Shen Lian's expression was extremely ugly. She stared at her and said, of course it's Tang Yu's. Li Sha was a little suspicious. However, she didn't care who Shen Lian said it was. After all, she wasn't the one who was pregnant. Li Sha left. She patted her chest and went back to her office to write a press release. After that, she wrote a resignation letter. The press release was sent to the media and the resignation letter was handed directly to Shen Lian. Shen Lian naturally threw a tantrum again. When Li Sha left, she was very happy. She finally didn't want to wait on her anymore. She heard a cracking sound behind her. It was probably an antique. Li Sha's lips curled up. She was crazy. Take your time. However, the press release was still sent out. After that, Xing Yuan and Jin Taihe's companies were pushed to the climax. It was even more lively than the entertainment industry. What Shen Lian didn't expect was that in the end, everyone was guessing whether the so-called Ion was Tang Yu's or the rapists. The rapist had given a detailed account of what happened that night. As for the time of the crime, it was ignored by everyone. What keyboard warriors wanted was the thrill of condemning others online. Shen Lian was going crazy. Every day, reporters would follow her and ask who the child was. Would Tang Yu mind? The child didn't exist. It couldn't be that man's. However, she was the one who released the news. How could she say that she wasn't pregnant? However, Tang Yu didn't say that the child wasn't his. Otherwise, she really wouldn't be able to step down. However, he told Xiao Ran that if she said abortion now, everything could be saved, and the impact would not be further expanded. Shen Lian felt that Tang Yu was showing weakness. How could she let go of such an opportunity? The OB/GYN department in and out of the hospital was photographed by the reporters many times, which confirmed the fact that Shen Lian was pregnant. However, the male lead did not say anything and did not appear beside Shen Lian. The reporters didn't give up. They followed and filmed for a few days, but to no avail. In the end, they concluded that Shen Lian got herself pregnant. Xing Yuan held another emergency shareholders meeting, and Xiao Ran informed Shen Lian. When Shen Lian entered, she saw Tang Yu sitting at the head of the table, and there were 20 to 30 shareholders sitting below him. Although there were many people, their proportion was very small, except for Tang Ziyuan. However, Tang Ziyuan's shares had been diluted to 5%, which was not enough to be mentioned in the same breath as her. Shen Lian sat next to Tang Yu, feeling a sense of superiority in her heart. She finally sat next to him, but Shen Lian didn't expect that today's topic would be acquisition. As the executive vice president, Xiao Yi threw out this question, and there was silence. Chapter 947. But Shen Lian didn't know that although Xing Yuan's finances were in trouble, she had never thought that a company could acquire Xing Yuan. Xing Yuan was a big shot in the north and no one could surpass it. Is it the Lin family? Shen Lian's voice carried a hint of a sneer. I knew it would be the Lin family. I have long seen through the sinister tricks you have been playing behind the scenes. Xiao Rand reminded her softly, Miss Shen, it's not. It's not. Shen Lian's gaze was a little confused. In her heart, only when the Lin family acquired Xing Yuan could Tang Yu save the company. But not now, she stared at him in disbelief. She had been sure that he was going against her, but now, it wasn't the Lin family. So, Xing Yuan really couldn't make it. Which company is it? She asked hesitantly. Xiao Ran pursed his lips and said, Boy. Shen Lian suddenly recalled that Qin Anlin mentioned the name of this company on the night of the fashion ceremony. He said that she had a small vision and asked her to go to Baidu. But she had never heard of a company called Boyi. And in such a short time, it had accumulated enough assets to acquire Xing Yuan. There had to be a problem somewhere. Just as Shen Lian was feeling suspicious, there was a sound at the door. Xiao Ran went to take a look and turned back quickly. She whispered something in Tang Yu's ear. Tang Yu's gaze was a little indifferent as he looked at the door. Shen Lian seemed to have realized something as she also looked at the door. The door of Xing Yuan's conference room was pulled open. Then, the crisp sound of high heels was heard. Was it a woman? Shen Lian narrowed her eyes instinctively. She wanted to see who had the guts to be so arrogant. Finally, a slender figure appeared at the door. It was Pei Chi-Chi. It was Pei Chi-Chi. Shen Lian's pupils constricted and her eyes were filled with disbelief. What was the relationship between Pei Chi-Chi and Bo Yi? Behind Pei Chi-Chi stood Xiao Wen and Dink. These two were already married and were now Pei Chi-Chi's right-hand men. Of course, this was also the result of Tang Yu's hard work over the past 2 years because he knew that these two were worthy of Chi-Chi's trust. Pei Chi-Chi walked in slowly. There was not much expression on her pretty face as she stood beside Tang Yu, opposite Shen Lian. She nodded lightly and said simply, "As the largest shareholder and CEO of Boyi, I'm here today to discuss with Mr. Tang Yu and everyone else the plan to acquire Xingyuan." All the shareholders panicked. Was this for real? Now that the shares had fallen to this extent, even if they contributed their shares, it would not be worth much if they were to be acquired. Tang Yu sat still and said indifferently, "Miss Pei, I need time to discuss with the shareholders." "I can wait too." Pei Chi-Chi sounded indifferent. She only needed to look up to see Shen Lian's probing eyes. Shen Lian did not believe that Pei Chi-Chi could own a company like Boyi because of Tang Yu. She raised her head and said firmly, "I don't agree to the acquisition." She was the second largest shareholder, so her words were naturally effective. She wanted to stop Tang Yu's conspiracy. This was definitely a conspiracy. And a conspiracy could only be stopped by an open conspiracy. Chapter 948. It didn't matter even if Shen Lian didn't give in during the acquisition this time. A person's heart couldn't stand being destroyed. None of the people sitting here were good people and they all knew that Tang Yu was behind all this. If they went with the flow now, they could take the money and live out their remaining years in peace. If they went against the flow, they would probably have no money left for their retirement. As long as these people were subdued, Shen Lian's 20% would no longer be that important. At that time, Xingyuan would be under Bo Yi's banner, and Pei Chi-Chi could do whatever she wanted with just a word. She owned 95% of Bo Yi's shares while Shen Lian only owned 20% of the subsidiary. It wasn't enough to compete. Moreover, she would deal a heavy blow to Shen Lian later on. Hearing Pei Chi-Chi's words, Shen Lian knew that it was very provocative to the other small shareholders. She looked at Tang Yu with a dark face. "If all this wasn't planned by you, then I don't think you want Xingyuan to be acquired, right?" Tang Yu smiled faintly. "I can only say that I'm going with the flow." These words expressed his attitude, and also gave the other shareholders a reassurance. It was fine. At most, they would just have to sell their shares. He believed that Tang Yu would not mistreat them. These old foxes' hearts were as clear as a mirror. It was obvious that this was a game of chess played by Tang Yu. If it wasn't for Tang Yu, Pei Chi-Chi wouldn't have been able to do anything no matter how capable she was. All of this was because of Shen Lian. It seemed that Tang Yu had no choice but to give up that 20%. Everyone looked at Shen Lian with disdain. They had been living so comfortably, but this woman had ruined everything. Shen Lian pursed her lips. At this moment, she seemed to be standing alone in the world. Alone. She suddenly laughed softly. It was a strange and eerie laugh. She looked at Pei Chi-Chi and said softly, "You think you've won, don't you?" "President Shen, I'm just stating the facts." Pei Chi-Chi smiled and did not avoid Lotus's gaze. With her intelligence, she probably guessed what bomb Shen Lian would throw at her next. He wasn't surprised, but he felt that Shen Lian was stupid. Sure enough, Shen Lian raised her red lips. Her expression was a little ferocious and twisted. Her voice was very soft, but everyone could hear it clearly. "I'm pregnant, Tang Yu's child. After that, Shen Lian stared at Pei Chi, expecting to see a trace of panic on her face. However, Pei Chi just smiled lightly and said, "Congratulations, President Shin, but I don't think this has anything to do with Boyi's acquisition of Xingyuan." She paused and looked at Shen Lian's unwilling expression. "Or do you think that Boyi also bought the child in your belly? This may not work. Boyi is a legitimate company, not a human trafficker." These words made Shen Lian so angry that her face turned pale. Why wasn't Pei Chi angry or sad? She should be angry. Even if she was with Tang Yu, as a woman, she couldn't be so calm when she heard that the man she liked had a child with someone else, right? Could it be that they weren't together? Did Pei Chi hate Tang Yu? Shen Lian stared at Pei Chi for a long time, but she couldn't see anything. However, Xiao Yi and Tang Ziyuan, who were sitting next to them, smiled. Tang Yu's little Chi-Chi's mouth was really sharp, just like a knife. Chapter 949. Shen Lian was unwilling to leave. She still said the same thing. She didn't agree to the purchase. However, she was confused. She knew that if everyone else agreed, her 20% wouldn't change anything. Even if she lost Xingyuan, she still had Jin Taihe. However, she felt uneasy. She felt that there was some certainty in Pei Chi-Chi's eyes. She was a little scared. She was afraid that Pei Chi-Chi had a bigger scheme. Pei Chi-Chi didn't manage to leave. While waiting for the elevator, Xiaowen reminded her, "Mr. Tang is coming." Pei Chi turned around and saw Tang Yu walking towards her. She was a little annoyed. The elevator door opened and she was about to enter when her arm was grabbed by a big hand. Xiaowen and Ding Ke left first, leaving Pei Chi behind. Looking at the closed elevator door, Pei Chi gritted her teeth. "When did you accept Ding Ke and Xiaowen?" "I've developed a deep relationship with them in the past 2 years." He trapped her against the wall with an unreadable expression. Pei Chi glared at him angrily and then turned her face away to ignore him. Tang Yu smiled and touched her face. "Chi, I thought you had something to ask me." "No." She turned her face away and didn't want to talk to him. This bastard. He looked at her blushing face and naturally knew what was going on. His fingers caressed her little face and slowly moved to her mouth. He caressed it gently with a hint of seduction. "Chi, you know that I've had a vasectomy. How could I have gotten her pregnant?" "That's right." His eyes were clear and his body was a little away from her, but it was this distance that made it even more seductive. Especially when he didn't get close to her, but he didn't let her go. Her face was hot, and listening to his shameless words made her even hotter. She pursed her lips and turned her face away. "You can make her pregnant with your fingers." Tang Yu smiled faintly. "This little thing. Is that so?" His fingers suddenly did what she wanted, and did what she wanted to do to make her pregnant. Pei Chi was shocked. She couldn't believe that he would do such a thing to her here. She struggled with all her might and lowered her voice. "Tang Yu, are you crazy?" He grunted as he tortured her slowly. Burying his face into her shoulder, he bit down on it and said slowly, "Chi, I miss you." Pei Chi was embarrassed and scared. She was afraid that someone would suddenly appear and she wouldn't want to live anymore. She bit her lips and glared at him. "If you continue like this, I'll fire everyone here." He chuckled. "Chi, why don't you fire me too?" "I was at the scene of the crime as well," he said. "Chi, why don't you fire me too?" He said the word case vaguely, but it sounded like the word love. Pei Chi raised her head. Her forehead was covered in a thin layer of sweat, and her voice was a little intermittent. "Tang Yu, didn't you get a vasectomy?" Why was his desire still so strong in a certain area? Tang Yu's thin lips were beside her ear and he chuckled. It doesn't affect me in that area. With that said, he bit her ear and coaxed her softly. How about I make you pregnant with my fingers? Chapter 950. Tang Yu reached out to tidy up her clothes. His voice was a little hoarse, but he couldn't be more serious. No matter what others say, it won't be true. Actually, how could she not know that? She was just angry. She leaned against the wall and looked at him. Tang Yu, do you know that when I face her, I only feel pain? She, Tang Xian, and Shen Lian. Shen Lian had too much. But it was precisely because she had too much that she wasn't satisfied. She even made so many mistakes for her own selfish desires. She did things to her, to Tang Xian, and even to Shen Zhongshan. Shen Lian's heart was already twisted. Just like now when she said that she was pregnant, she didn't leave herself a way out at all. Tang Yu's heart was also wet. It wasn't that he didn't sigh. When he was young, he had a very simple relationship with Shen Lian, and it ended because of his problems. Chi-Chi, everything will be fine. He knew that it was difficult for her to do all this. But he had to do it. Chi-Chi was the heir chosen by Shen Zhongshan. No matter how unwilling he wanted her to have another layer of protection. Moreover, Shen Lian couldn't stay in City B. Only by completely destroying her would their lives be peaceful. She looked at him and smiled. I'll go back first. Tang Yu reached out and hugged her. He wanted to say yes, but he was a little reluctant. He hadn't seen her for a few days. He was willing to ask her to stay for lunch. Pei Chi-Chi adjusted his tie with her fingers and said softly, in the future. What we have to do now is not let Shen Lian have anything against us. Tang Yu's transfer of assets was actually an economic crime. This kind of thing depended on whether one's method was clever or not. Shen Lian couldn't find any evidence at the moment, but it was better to be careful. Tang Yu looked at her calm face and pinched her cheek with his fingers. He said in a low voice, our Chi-Chi is so sensible. I'm a little, not used to it. She glared at him. Tang Yu chuckled and let go of her. There's still time. When Pei Chi-Chi heard this, she felt that there was a deeper meaning behind it. Mr. Tang, I'd rather you weren't as shameless as I thought. She lightly snorted. Tang Yu put on a noble face and said seriously, Chi-Chi, what I mean is exactly what you're thinking. She glared at him. Tang Yu smiled and reached out to touch her little head. It's done. The car is waiting downstairs. Remember to eat lunch. She nodded but didn't move. She was a little reluctant to let her go now that he was letting her go so easily. Pei Chi-Chi despised herself and meowed like a kitten, you too. He nodded and kissed her. His voice was hoarse. I'll visit you in a few days. No way. She pushed him away and pressed the elevator button. Tang Yu stood outside and watched her go in. Pei Chi-Chi made a face at him and the elevator door closed. He shook his head and smiled. At this moment, Xiao Ran came from behind and coughed. President Jin Taihe said that Shen Lian is going to announce her pregnancy and accept an interview. Tang Yu thought for a moment and smiled. Prepare to hold a press conference. Of course, after Shen Lian's press conference. Xiao Ran blinked, not understanding what Tang Yu was thinking. Was it to clarify? Chapter 951. Shen Lian called for a press conference. On the surface, it was to talk about Jin Taihe's current situation, but at the end of the conference, she still threw out the fact that she was pregnant. Moreover, there was a pleading look in her beautiful eyes as she faced the camera. She was almost tearfully playing the family card, hinting at Pei Chi-Chi from afar. I know that Tang Yu is a very outstanding man, and there are many women who like him. But some people's entanglement has already affected our family of 3. I hope that some people will know when to back off, because I am already pregnant with Tang Yu's child. Shen Lian lowered her stance to the lowest and guided the public. Previously, it was just groundless speculation, but now that the main character had made an oath, it was going to be interesting. Moreover, everyone knew about Tang Yu's previous marriage. At this moment, it was also obvious who Shen Lian was referring to. It could only be said that this woman was very scheming. The reporters were excited. This was going to be a palace drama. In addition, there was news through the grapevine that Pei Chi-Chi had made a comeback with Boyi Company. She had the posture of a goddess of vengeance. There were many people who disliked Shen Lian, and they all praised her. However, was it true that Shen Lian was pregnant? Whether it was true or not, it was enough for the entertainment reporters to write a good drama to fight for the headlines. However, the headlines had just been written, and the draft was still hot. On the other side, Xing Yuan broadcast Tang Yu's exclusive video through the satellite media. It was also Xing Yuan's first public statement. In the video, Tang Yu looked slightly tired. Based on the statement that Miss Shen Lian made this morning, I will make the following statement on behalf of myself and Xing Yuan. First, I don't know how Miss Shen Lian got pregnant, but I couldn't have made her pregnant. Tang Yu showed a hospital certificate. It was the certificate of his vasectomy 3 months ago, and there was a notary on the spot. After confirming it, Tang Yu's tone became even more indifferent. In view of Miss Shen Lian's behavior, I hereby announce that our engagement is off. The people watching the live video were in an uproar. One side said that she was pregnant, and the other side said that she had a vasectomy and wanted to break off the engagement. It seemed that Tang Yu had been cuckolded. It was obvious that Xing Yuan had fallen into the acquisition trap because of Shen Lian. How could an unhappy man have the heart to build a career? In the past, Xing Yuan was like the sun in the sky. In the past, he was so noble and unapproachable. The reporters wiped away their tears and went to edit their scripts. A proper reversal of the situation. It was too exciting. This drama had been bustling in B City for a week. Later, it was stirred up by the scandal of Heavenly Queen Yi and a certain fresh meat. However, on the other side, Shen Lian could not sit still. What? Tang Yu underwent a vasectomy. How could that be? Did he not want to leave a descendant for the Tang family? Shen Lian sat in the office, her whole body cold. She immediately realized that things were not that simple. Tang Yu's message wasn't just a response to her, but she turned on the computer and quickly typed in the instructions. The numbers that appeared on the computer screen shocked her. Shen Lian's body immediately leaned against the back of the chair. Her heart was cold. Xing Yuan's stock price was plummeting like a cliff. Was he crazy? Using this method, he would lose 3,000 soldiers and 300 of his own. Did he know how much he would lose? Tang Yu had thought about it before. He had thought about it carefully, but after evaluating Boyi's acquisition, the stock price would recover at a normal speed. Shen Lian watched in a daze. Her whole body was cold, and she felt that the momentum was gone. Moreover, he said that he had broken off the engagement with her. Chapter 952. Shen Lian frantically dialed Tang Yu's number, but he only replied calmly, "I've told you not to do that." She was the one who had chosen this path, causing both parties to fall out. And this was exactly what Tang Yu wanted. Shen Lian stood there in a daze, listening to the beeping sound on the other end of the line. Her body softened. The door opened, and it was Meng Qingqing. Shen Lian's face was filled with tears as she looked up at Meng Qingqing. Meng Qingqing's voice was flat and emotionless. "I advise you to sell your shares now, or you will become worthless in the future. I won't. Shen Lian's voice was stern, and her entire body was trembling. She glared at Meng Qingqing. Even you want to betray me, don't you? Meng Qingqing was still calm, and he was not shaken by Shen Lian's hysterical look. You will regret it. Shen Lian's face was filled with tears as she gritted her teeth. I thought we were in the same boat. I hate them as much as you do. They took Tang Xian's life, didn't they? Meng Qingqing turned around and left. At the door, he said calmly, you still don't understand the principle of sacrificing pawns to save riches. So, this woman was destined to be a tragedy. Shen Lian could only watch as the door closed. The room was cold, and she was the only one left, sitting there alone. Her entire body was cold, and it spread all the way to the place where her leg was broken. No one would care about her emotions. Shen Lian thought of Shen Zhongshan and Mrs. Shen. She drove to Shen Zhongshan's apartment. After sitting for a while, she flipped her hair and went up. Shen Lian did not know why she came over. She just felt that she wanted to see them. She knocked on the door and leaned to the side, afraid that Mrs. Shen would not open the door. Mrs. Shen opened the door. She was dressed in plain clothes that made her look much older. She looked at Shen Lian, who was standing at the door. Her gaze was a little confused, but more than that, it was guarded. Mom, aren't you going to let me in? Shen Lian's voice was very soft as she looked at Mrs. Shen. Mrs. Shen pursed her lips and stared at her. What are you doing here? Shen Lian smiled oddly. Mom, I'm Shen Lian. I'm here to see your dad. Why are you asking me why I'm here? You're not welcome here. Mrs. Shen was angry with Shen Lian and didn't want to have anything to do with her. She was about to close the door, but how could she, who was weak and sick, be a match for Shen Lian? Shen Lian opened the door easily. She carried a small bag and looked around the living room. Her voice was soft and gentle. Dad, are you there? I know you're home. I'm Shen Lian. I'm here to see you. I brought your favorite matcha cake. As she spoke, she walked towards the bedroom. Sure enough, Shen Zhongshan was sitting in a wheelchair in the bedroom, looking out the window. From his back, he looked no different from an old man with dementia. Mrs. Shen immediately stopped Shen Lian and asked sternly, Shen Lian, what are you trying to do? Shen Lian had no choice but to stop in her tracks. She looked down at her mother. Once upon a time, her mother was a lady of the upper class, but now, she was willing to live a secluded life for Shen Zhongshan. The rough life had worn away her original wealth, and now, she looked like an ordinary woman. Mom, we're mother and daughter. We're related by blood. Shen Zhongshan and you are just a married couple who share the same bed but dream different dreams. Since when did he care about you? Shen Lian's voice was very soft and there was a hint of coaxing in it. Chapter 953. Shen Lian suddenly turned Shen Zhongshan's wheelchair around and squinted at the slightly demented old man. Dad, I'm here to congratulate you. Shen Lian raised her head. That bastard you and Zhao Ku gave birth to has grown up. She's back to take revenge. If I had known this would happen, I wouldn't have saved her. I would have let that bastard die. Shen Lian sneered. At that time, I could still enjoy the scene of Tang Yu grieving. Also, I would have let you watch your bastard and Zhao Ku's bastard die one by one. Mrs. Shen snapped back to reality and scolded, your dad is already like this. Why are you still provoking him? Are you still human? Shen Lian turned her face to Mrs. Shen and looked at her quietly for a long time. Then, she laughed softly, tears rolling down her cheeks. Mom, I have nothing left. Tang Yu and I have broken off the engagement. Xingyuan is going to be acquired maliciously. I know that he did it, but I can't do anything about it. I'm watching everything that I've exchanged for with my bone marrow leave me. How can I not be sad? Her voice became softer. I'm so sad. Don't you feel sad for me? She picked up the snacks and stuffed them into Shen Zhongshan's mouth. She looked at Mrs. Shen as she stuffed them. Look, he's still in the mood to eat. So, I'm not important in his heart at all. In his heart, he only thinks about those two bastards. Fortunately, one bastard is dead. If another one dies, it would be perfect. Isn't that right, Mom? Shen Lian said crazily. Mrs. Shen's whole body was trembling. She pointed at Shen Lian with trembling hands. She couldn't believe that this was her daughter. If it was her daughter, how could she be so cruel? How could she treat her own parents like this? She was worse than a bastard. But, no matter what, this was the reality. Mrs. Shen burst into tears. Shen Lian raised her eyebrows and her voice became softer. Mom, look at you. Why are you so silly? Why did you come to a place like this? Isn't it good to be with me? What did Shen Zhongshan give you? Only waiting in the endless night. Don't you remember? When I was young, we always waited together for Dad to come back, but he never came back. Even when he did, he always smelled of perfume. Shen Lian smiled coldly. She looked at Mrs. Shen with an almost crazy expression. Mom, as long as this man disappears, we will all be free. Mrs. Shen was so angry that her whole body was trembling. She stared at Shen Lian and said in a harsh voice, Do you know what you're talking about, you animal? Shen Lian chuckled. Mom, why are you being silly again? It's this man who brought us endless pain. I'm just doing what I should do. Kill your father, and then Jean Taihe will be yours, right? Mrs. Shen said sternly. She slowly squatted in front of Shen Zhongshan and cleaned the stains on his face. Her voice was especially gentle. Zhongshan, don't be afraid. I'll always be by your side. Shen Zhongshan's eyes were dull and his whole body was fat. He couldn't say a word. He just looked at his wife and his lips trembled. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't say a word. Chapter 954. Mrs. Shen was still squatting down. She said in a low voice, If you want to kill him, you can kill me too. Shen Lian was stunned. She narrowed her eyes and looked at Mrs. Shen. She had never thought that she would be willing to live and die with Shen Zhongshan. When they were young, they always quarreled. Her mother always said that they wanted a divorce. But now, the handsome and high-spirited Shen Zhongshan had become like this. They still did not get a divorce. Instead, it was her mother who never left Shen Zhongshan. Very good, really very good. It made her daughter seem unfilial. She was a jerk. It was a gift from topping up. There was hatred in Shen Lian's eyes. Mom, do you really only have him in your heart? Mrs. Shen buried her face in Shen Zhongshan's knees. Tears streamed down her face. He is my husband. I won't allow you to hurt him. It was she who did not teach her daughter well. That was why she had committed such a heinous crime. But she did not have the courage to expose her. She was guilty. She had let Zhongshan and Shen Lian down. She was not a good wife, let alone a good mother. If she was destined to go to hell, then let her go. Shen Lian stood still for a long time. Her motherly figure lay on her father's lap, so calm and peaceful. She was like an outsider. She had gotten Jean Taihe, but she had lost her family. When Shen Lian walked out, her body was swaying. There were tears in her eyes. She was smiling. She was smiling at herself. She was smiling at herself. Mrs. Shen's voice rang out from behind. It was a heart-wrenching feeling. It was all the hope a mother had for her own child. Shen Lian, stop. Stop. Shen Lian turned around and looked at her mother. She chuckled and said, "Stop. That's impossible. Mom, I can't turn back." The door closed. The room was cold and desolate. Mrs. Shen wailed loudly. Her entire world was dark and gloomy. Her husband had become like this. Her daughter had gone crazy. Suddenly, a thick palm was placed on her hair and patted it lightly. Mrs. Shen was stunned. She raised her head and looked at her beloved husband. She called out softly, "Chongshan." Shen Zhongshan's eyes were clear now. He reached out and wiped the tears from his wife's eyes. His slightly cloudy eyes were filled with guilt towards her. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse. "Suxin, I'm sorry for all these years." Mrs. Shen blinked and looked at Shen Zhongshan in disbelief. Tears streamed down her cheeks again as she murmured, "Zhongshan. It's me." Shen Zhongshan's fingers helped her wipe her tears again. His actions were unbelievably gentle. They had been married for so many years, and this was the most gentle he had ever been to her. Mrs. Shen's lips couldn't stop trembling. She called his name again. She couldn't stop her tears, but they were tears of joy. Her Chongshan had actually recovered, and he could actually recognize her, actually calling her Suxin. She was crying and laughing at the same time. In Shen Zhongshan's eyes, this was her most beautiful appearance in all these years, even though she was in such a sorry state. "Suxin, it's me." He reached out and pulled her up. His voice was gentle. "Don't cry like a little girl. You're already so big. Aren't you afraid of being laughed at?" Mrs. Shen lay on his lap, unable to get up. Her legs were weak. Shen Zhongshan decided to roll his wheelchair to the side of the bed and carefully carried her up. The old couple lay side by side. His fingers gently touched her face, and his voice was hoarse. "Suxin, I'll make it up to you in the future. I won't go anywhere for the rest of my life. I'll be with you." Mrs. Shen raised her teary eyes and sobbed. "There won't be any other women." Shen Zhongshan hugged her and sighed. "Suxin, look at me now. Will there still be women who will want me?" Then, the two of them looked at each other and smiled. Chapter 955. Because of Tang Yu's video, the reporters had been following him around like crazy. The biggest disadvantage was that he couldn't meet Pei Chi-Chi. When Boyi acquired Xingyuan, he and Pei Chi-Chi couldn't have any private activities being filmed. Otherwise, he could be sued for maliciously transferring the company's assets and Shen Lian would have something on him. He couldn't see her in private for a whole week. Of course, Pei Chi-Chi often appeared in Xingyuan, but they were separated by a cold negotiating table. She always wore a high-end suit, looked at him coldly, and called him Mr. Tang. Just like now, she was looking at him with an annoying expression and pushed an asset valuation report over. She said indifferently, "Mr. Tang, this is Xingyuan's latest asset report. I think Mr. Tang should consider it carefully. Do you want to be acquired? Even if Mr. Tang doesn't consider it for yourself, you should consider the shareholders of Xingyuan Group." These words hit the nail on the head of the shareholders. The situation was unclear now, so it was better to disband. Who knew what would happen in the future? The most important thing was to take the money and retire. Tang Ziyuan didn't say anything, and neither did Zhao Yi. Their hearts were as clear as a mirror. This time, Xingyuan's reshuffle was more or less targeted at these veterans. Tang Yu had long been dissatisfied with them holding onto the shares and ordering the group around. At this moment, the shares had plummeted. If they took back all the shares, they would have paid a lot less. Tang Ziyuan thought to himself, this son is much more unscrupulous than me. However, this little wife's posture was good. Her little face was tense, and she acted well. She felt that she acted much better than her disappointing sister, Pei Huan. Look, how professional. Looking at Tang Yu's eyes, the little knives were flying, and it seemed like it was real. Tang Ziyuan was more and more satisfied. Then, he exchanged a look with Zhao Yi. My little wife is not bad, right? Although Lin Yun was Zhao Yi's wife now, Tang Yu was Tang Ziyuan's biological son. According to kinship, Pei Qiqi was his little wife, not Zhao Yi's. It had to be said that Tang Ziyuan was very promising now. Zhao Yi had always been a magnanimous person. Adding on the fact that he had Lin Yun and little Zhao Yan, he was 100 times more proud than Tang Ziyuan. He smiled and said nothing. Tang Ziyuan was a little lonely, just like a martial arts master who couldn't find an opponent. Lonely. At this time, Tang Yu looked at Pei Qiqi, then glanced at the shareholders below. What do you think? Everyone looked at each other, but no one said anything. Because no one wanted to be the first to declare their position. If he seconded the motion and agreed, he would be the first traitor, and it would be bad for his reputation. If he disagreed, he would be going against his conscience. Cashing out now was the right thing to do. Moreover, if he kept quiet, Bo Yi's side would offer a higher price. Now there was silence. Tang Ziyuan was the first to raise his hand and said calmly, I agree to the purchase. All of a sudden, everyone's eyes popped out. One must know that Tang Ziyuan was the founder of Xingyuan Group. Now that he was acquired by Bo Yi, it was like selling a child. No matter who it was, it would not be Tang Ziyuan's turn. It's nothing. There are many talented people in the country. If Xingyuan can't hold on, why should we drag everyone down with us? We should give the employees at the bottom a way out. Tang Ziyuan's act was good. Chapter 956. So, one by one, they raised their hands shamelessly. I agree. I agree too. Since everyone says so, I agree too. This person was very shameless. We have to give the employees a way out. There are tens of thousands of people in Xingyuan who need to support their families. I believe that Bo Yi will not mistreat them. Of course, what he was most concerned about was whether Bo Yi would mistreat him. Except for Shen Lian, all the shareholders expressed their opinions. Shen Lian's face was very ugly, and her voice was tense. You don't have to consider my opinion, do you? Tang Yu said slowly, although Mr. Shen has 20%, the majority of votes have decided that Xingyuan will be acquired by Bo Yi. Moreover, Mr. Shen has no actual position in Xingyuan, so she has no decision-making power. If Mr. Shen is the only one who objects, it will be invalid. Shen Lian's lips curled into a cold smile. Tang Yu, aren't you afraid of retribution for the show you arranged? Tang Yu was still indifferent. I think I have a clear conscience for every step I take, especially for you, Miss Shin. They were no longer engaged in name, so there was no need for him to pretend to be courteous to her. Shen Lian raised her head and smiled gently. Then I have to thank you for your generosity. I can sell this 20% to you. Just think of it as what I got from selling my bone marrow. She looked at Pei Qiqi. My bone marrow is very expensive, it's worth billions. Pei Qiqi, it's not that my bone marrow is expensive, it's that in Tang Yu's eyes, your life is precious. In the end, she added, don't talk about money, he can even sacrifice Tang Xan's life. Finally, a crack appeared on Pei Qiqi's impeccable face. And this was what Shen Lian wanted. She smiled gently. Pei Qiqi, remember your life. You survived by stepping on Tang Xan's corpse. Don't you feel guilty? She wanted Pei Chi to be in pain. She wanted her to live a life worse than death. She wanted her to be like her, unable to sleep every night. Pei Chi looked at Shen Lian, the crazy woman, and said coldly, "If you had any humanity in you, you wouldn't have said such words." No matter what happened between them in their past lives, Tang Xan was still related to Shen Lian by blood, and she was so cute. However, Shen Lian provoked Tang Xan so much that she left so early. Pei Chi's face was sad, but strong. "If you think that I'll lose the courage to live like this, you're wrong. I love Tang Xan. If I can, I will also lose my life for her, because she is my sister." Pei Chi did not cry. She would never cry in front of Shen Lian. Even if Shen Lian stabbed her in the heart, she would not cry. Very touching. Shen Lian wanted to continue, but Pei Chi interrupted her. "President Shen, I'm doubting your professionalism. We are in a meeting now, not talking about personal feelings." Shen Lian's face darkened. She did not expect Pei Chi to rebuke her like that. But she could not refute it. She could only look at Pei Chi coldly. "I won't let you go so easily. That's what I wanted to say to you." Pei Chi's little face was also full of coldness. "President Shen, we will meet again. Next time, we will fight at Jean Taiha's conference table." Shen Lian narrowed her eyes. "Pei Chi, you bastard. Do you think you can take everything from me? Stop dreaming." Chapter 957. Shen Lian had wanted to provoke Pei Chi, but now she was provoked by Pei Chi. Pei Chi looked at her and smiled. What if it comes true? Shen Lian's face was pale as she walked out angrily. "Transfer the funds to my account." At this point, Shen Lian had completely left the stage of Xingyuan. But no matter how much Xingyuan shrank, the 20% in her hands was still tens of billions of cash. Shen Lian stood in the elevator, looked at the mirror and murmured, "What do I need money for?" She had never gotten what she wanted. Pei Chi's words threw a huge stone in Shen Lian's heart, as if she was facing a formidable enemy. She couldn't let Pei Chi take away her Jean Taiha again. She didn't deserve such a bastard. In the CEO's office of Xingyuan, Pei Chi sat on the sofa and drank the coffee made by Xiao Ran. She glanced around and then looked at Tang Yu. "Why do I feel that your office looks a little shabby?" Tang Yu walked over and took the coffee from her hand. "Then do you think the taste of this coffee has changed?" Pei Chi smiled. "There seems to be a little less sugar." Tang Yu, "Really, if you have financial difficulties, I can give you some money." Naughty. He sat on the armrest of the sofa and looked a little lazy. Pei Chi was also. Finally, Shen Lian was forced to take off her armor and leave. It took about a month. She looked at him. "Don't you feel bad about the 10 billion? He smiled and didn't say anything. What he didn't say was that he bought bone marrow for Chi. Even if it was 100 billion, he wouldn't feel bad. However, Shen Lian couldn't be left alive. Pei Chi snatched the coffee from his hand and drank it silently. Tang Yu looked at her sideways and rubbed her fluffy little head for a while. "Chi, don't worry." He knew that she had been brooding over Tang Xan's death. Today, she was provoked by Shen Lian in front of so many people. It was impossible for her not to be sad, although she pretended that nothing had happened. Pei Chi pursed her lips and lowered her eyes. She looked at Tang Yu and said in a low voice, "No." Just as he heaved a sigh of relief, she suddenly came over and hugged his waist, burying her little face in his chest. Tang Yu was surprised and looked down at the little guy in his arms. She shook her head. "Tang Yu, I'll just hold you for a while. I'll be done in a while. His heart was very upset, and he felt a little guilty for bringing up her sad past. However, he would rather be the one to bring it up. He would rather be in her arms when she cried. She was crying silently. Her voice was very low, but he heard it. Tang Yu, I often think that when I go home, Tang Axian will be sitting at my door, carrying a small bag and running away from home. She will say to me, Chi-Chi, I want to stay here for a few days. My parents are quarreling again. She closed her eyes and grabbed his clothes with her little hand. Every night when the elevator door opens, my heart will beat very fast. I'm looking forward to it, but I'm also afraid. She still didn't want to believe that such a cute little girl like Tang Axian was gone. Tang Yu hugged her, and his heart was also wet. Although it was very cruel, it was something that Chi-Chi had to face. His voice was low and slow. Chi-Chi, when Tang Axian left, she was very calm. Chapter 958. Tang Yu said in a low voice, Chi-Chi has always been with us. She has become our Xiaoxin and will always be by our side. Pei Chi-Chi closed her eyes and cried in his arms for a long time. Perhaps she had been avoiding it all this while, and today, Shen Lian happened to be the one who tore a hole in her heart. Her wounds were exposed to the public. Because she was emotionally unstable, Tang Yu asked Lao Zhao to send her back to the apartment in the afternoon and gave her a few special reminders. While Pei Chi-Chi was sitting in the car, Tang Yu sent her a video. It was a video of Xiaoxin playing at home. Xiaoxin was facing the camera, grinning and revealing a few white teeth. She was smiling so much that she was drooling. It was so cute that it soothed the pain in Pei Chi-Chi's heart. She kept watching, her fingers gently stroking Xiaoxin's little face. This child was her salvation. Lao Zhao sent her to the apartment and watched her enter Lao Can's place. She was living with Pei Huan and Lao Can now. Tang Yu had specially approved it, saying that it was for her safety. As soon as she entered, she saw Pei Huan's blank expression and Lao Can's bewildered expression. The two of them were squatting there like fossils. What's wrong? Pei Chi-Chi smiled and walked over to look at a piece of paper in Lao Can's hand. She snatched it and saw 3 lines. It was a hospital test report, and the name on it was Pei Huan. To be specific, Pei Huan was pregnant. Pei Chi-Chi looked at it in a daze and then looked up at Pei Huan in a daze. Pregnant. Pei Huan was also in a daze. Lao Can was also in a daze. After a long time, Pei Huan took a deep breath. Chi-Chi, what should I do? I'm pregnant. Tell me, how did I get pregnant? Pei Chi-Chi was the first to come back to her senses. She pursed her lips and said in a low voice, You have to ask Lao Kansas. Old Can also came back to his senses and said gruffly, Of course it's because I put my life on the line. Pei Huan couldn't stand his vulgar words. She glanced at him, then carefully held her flat belly and looked at Pei Chi-Chi. Chi-Chi, you will be willing to be the baby's nanny, won't you? Pei Chi-Chi rolled her eyes. Pei Huan, you can be more shameless. Old Can also patted Pei Huan's head and shouted, Of course we have to take care of our own children. Also, from now on, pay attention to keeping warm. Don't wear those revealing clothes. Be careful not to catch a cold. Pei Chi-Chi almost laughed out loud. Lao Can must have minded it a long time ago, and now he took the opportunity to bring it up. Pei Huan howled and agreed weakly. She caressed her stomach. She still couldn't believe it. Was she really pregnant? The doctor had said that it was unlikely for her to get pregnant, but Lao Can had made her pregnant in just 2 months. Pei Huan's eyes were sparkling, and she looked like she was saying, My Lao Can is amazing. Pei Chi-Chi smiled and sat on the sofa to look at the pregnancy report again. Pei Huan leaned over and said softly, "Chi-Chi, you're so nervous." This wasn't the first time Pei Huan was pregnant, but it was the first time she was pregnant with a child with love. Looking at old Can's silly look, she knew that he must be overjoyed. Pei Chi-Chi looked at their happy faces and smiled slightly. She was happy for them. Chapter 959. Pei Chi-Chi had a suggestion. "The doctor may I know is not bad." Pei Huan was a little timid, because she knew that Dr. May and the Lin family also knew each other. Pei Chi-Chi immediately noticed that she was in a dilemma. Before she could change her words, Old Can said happily, "Chi-Chi is right. Pei Huan, let's find this Dr. May." Pei Huan calmed down a lot when she saw his silly look. "So be it, Dr. May. Anyway, Lao Can knew about her past." Pei Huan touched her belly again, looking happy. She looked up and asked Old Can, "When are we getting married?" She paused for a moment and said, "I don't want to get married with a big belly. I will look ugly." Old Can thought for a moment. "We haven't got the house yet. How about we book a presidential suite for a month and then move back? When the house is decorated, we will move in." He was still concerned about Pei Huan's feelings. After all, marriage was. Although it was their second time, it was the first time they were getting married. He couldn't let her feel that he was being careless. Pei Huan felt that whatever he said was good, so she made up her mind. The next morning, Pei Chi-Chi accompanied them to see Dr. May. Dr. May also knew Pei Huan. When she saw her, she was a little surprised by her change. This girl used to be a little frivolous, but now she exuded a sweet aura. Looking at the man beside her, he was quite rough, but his eyes were pure. They should be a good match. Dr. May sighed in her heart. Even a selfish girl like Pei Huan had turned over a new leaf. The world was still full of truth, kindness, and beauty. After a checkup, the child was fine. Dr. May prescribed a bottle of folic acid and gave Pei Huan a tablet a day. She told her to come back for a checkup in a month. After the three of them went out, Pei Huan covered her heart. Dr. May is a good person. In fact, she was afraid that Dr. May would tell her about her past. Although Old Can also knew about it, she didn't want him to know it from others. She didn't want him to know that she had once had an abortion. Now that she was pregnant, she realized how shallow her love for Jinrong was. If Lao Can had been the one in a vegetative state, she would not have been willing to abort their child and would have chosen to give birth to it. As soon as he walked to the door of the obstetrics and gynecology department, he saw Shen Lian coming from the opposite direction. Pei Huan knew about her scandal. Seeing her coming over, she sneered, "Miss Shen, are you also here for the obstetrics and gynecology? Are you going to get rid of the bastard in your stomach now? That matter, don't be too funny." She reported that she was pregnant with Tang Yu's flesh and blood, but Tang Yu said that she had a vasectomy. If the thing in his belly wasn't a bastard, then what was it? When Pei Huan thought of that yellow-toothed woman, he felt very happy. Shen Lian, this woman, didn't live up to her reputation. She was very sinister. He didn't use a knife on her before. Now that he had the opportunity, how could Pei Huan not think of a way to ruthlessly ridicule her? Shen Lian was there to meet a friend and accidentally saw Pei Chi-Chi. She looked at Pei Huan and looked down. She saw that Pei Huan was wearing flat shoes, and Can Mingzhu was also very careful with her. Shen Lian smiled sinisterly and looked at Pei Huan. "Are you going to get married? Don't you want to be polite?" Chapter 960. Pei Huan was also a very arrogant person. Hearing her words, she naturally had to fight back. As long as Chi-Chi is happy, nothing is impossible. But you, Shen Lian, how could you share a big yellow tooth with so many old women? Don't you dream at night? Shen Lian's face changed. Pei Huan had stepped on the thing that she was most unwilling to touch in the depths of her heart. She stared at Pei Huan, and the viciousness in her eyes startled a proud little princess like Pei Huan. She took 2 steps back and stared at Shen Lian. However, with Lao Kent by her side, Pei Huan was not afraid. She continued to sneer, "What? Did you bring such a man to rape me?" Shen Lian looked at her gloomily and then looked at Lao Kent beside her without saying anything. She didn't dare to say anything because the big man beside Pei Huan was looking at her as if he would break her in half at any time. That arm was thicker than her leg. After Shen Lian left, Pei Huan almost jumped up and shouted. Pei Chi stopped her. She looked at Shen Lian's back and pursed her lips. "Why do you have to provoke a mad dog? The most important thing now is the child in your belly." Pei Huan was very obedient now. She had to think about what Lao Can said, but she had to listen to Pei Chi. So she was as obedient as a little lamb again. It was as magical as changing her face. Although Lao Can was a rough man, he also agreed with Pei Chi in his heart. He lowered his head and said to his woman, "These days, refuse the work that you can, and finish the work that you can't. After that, you can rest assured and take care of the baby." Lao Ken was a man who cared about his face, but he knew it was not the time to care about it. He didn't have much savings, and there was not much left after buying the house. He would do his best to give Pei Huan and the child the best, but if she wanted to live a luxurious life, she would have to rely on the dividends of hundreds of millions of yuan a year. At this time, he couldn't let her and the child be in danger for the sake of his own face. Pei Huan also valued this child, so she obediently agreed. That scene made Pei Chi let out a long sigh. If Pei Huan had been this friendly when they were young, there probably wouldn't have been so many problems later on. Because Pei Huan was pregnant, the wedding was brought forward. Pei Chi had asked Xiao Wen to contact a lot of things. Pei Huan's manager, Xiao Mei, was the final confirmation, so Pei Huan was quite comfortable. However, Pei Chi was really busy. After Bo Yi acquired Xing Yuan, she was very, very busy. She didn't know why Tang Yu didn't take over. Instead, he gave her pointers on how to operate a large multinational company and even let her decide on many big projects. She was often afraid that she would make Boyi close down, but Tang Yu didn't seem to care. Boyd's headquarters moved into Xing Yuan's building, completely occupying Xing Yuan. In Tang Yu's words, Boyi had occupied Xing Yuan, and Pei Chi had also occupied him. Pei Chi felt that this was quite shameless. After the third meeting between Boyi and Xing Yuan, Pei Chi, yes, President Pei, left Tang Yu behind and received countless ambiguous gazes. Especially the employees of Xing Yuan. "Not only did you occupy Xing Yuan, but you also want to occupy our president in the meeting room?" Pei Chi thought to himself, "You can molest me in the meeting room, but can't I treat him like this?" Everyone laughed. In the high-end and grand meeting room, Pei Chi sat at the head of the wooden conference table. Her expression was still tense as she looked at Tang Yu. Chapter 961. Pei Chi's voice was soft. "Tang Yu, isn't it good for you to be the CEO? I want to return the shares and the office to you. It's so tiring." Tang Yu was a seat away from her. Seeing her like this, he smiled and said, "Aren't you doing well?" She looked at him suspiciously. "Do you have other plans? Could it be that he wanted to go home and be a nanny? In the future, she would be the one earning money for the milk powder." Pei Chi screamed, "I don't want it." Tang Yu stroked his chin and smiled. Chi, I didn't say I want it. But if you really want it, I can cooperate. But are you sure you want to be here? His eyes swept left and right, hinting at her. Pei Chi glared at him. He was shameless. He knew that wasn't what she meant. Tang Yu smiled. Chi, in 6 months, after you take over Jean Taihe, I will take over Bo Yi. Jean Taihe. Pei Chi was stunned. Tang Yu. Chi, Shan might not be able to hold on for that long. Although he found out in time after Shen Lian drugged him, his brain might shrink in the end. Tang Yu stared at her, his eyes dark. He didn't know how she would react, but he felt that he was being cruel. She had thought that after helping Shen get Jean Taihe, she would be able to stay out of it and leave Jean Taihe behind. But if it was that simple, Shen wouldn't need her help. From the beginning, Shen had wanted her to take over Jean Taihe. Now, Bo Yi would be her internship. Tang Yu didn't do anything, but it didn't mean that he didn't care. But so far, his Chi was great. Pei Chi was stunned after hearing Tang Yu's words. She hadn't expected the truth to be like this. She thought that Shen only hated Shen Lian and wanted to take back the Shen family. Even if the 20% was given to her, she didn't want it. He had helped Shen because he had wanted to be a match for Tang Xan, but after helping her, she no longer wanted to be Shen daughter. But now, Tang Yu said that Shen might be suffering from brain atrophy. At this moment, what Pei Chi didn't know was that Shen had already signed a consent form for the operation while he was still in good condition. This was so that if there was a problem with her body in the future, he would risk his life to save her. Mrs. Shen knew and agreed. No matter what decision Shen made, she would agree. Regardless of life or death, she would follow him. In the past, she loved him deeply, he did not know. Now that he had become like this, she still loved him deeply. He understood, and was willing to repay her. Pei Chi and Tang Xan were Chongshan's children. Now that Shen Lian had become like that, there was no hope for her. Whatever Chongshan decided, it was up to him. Mrs. Shen was grateful that Chongshan did not give up on Shen Lian. Instead, he sent her abroad. Perhaps she would be able to calm down there. At this moment, Pei Chi was in a daze. After a long time, she regained her composure and looked at Tang Yu. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. She had lost too much. Shen and she did not have much feelings for each other, just like Xiao Ku. Or perhaps not like Xiao Ku, because she did not have a mother, and Pei Mingyi made up for her father's shortcomings. But now, hearing this news, she was still sad, or... Chapter 962. Would Pei Mingyi's condition worsen in the future? Would he not even be able to hear her call him little sister? Pei Chi-Chi's body trembled slightly. Suddenly, she left her seat and walked to Tang Yu's back to hug him. She did not say anything and only hugged him from behind. She wanted to feel his warmth. She buried her face in his neck and said in a soft voice like a lamb, "Tang Yu." Even if she did not say it, he knew what she was thinking. She was afraid and insecure. He hugged her back and said as if he was coaxing a child, "Chi, I'm here. I've always been here." She was sullen and did not speak. She buried her face in his neck and closed her eyes, not saying a word. "What's wrong?" His voice was unbelievably gentle. At that moment, the person hugging him was not Boss Pei but his Chi, that fragile little girl. Pei Chi bit his ear. Tang Yu's body went numb. His eyes darkened and his voice was unbelievably hoarse. "Chi, you're tempting me to commit a crime." She lay on his shoulder and did not speak for a long time. She just bit him. She was like a puppy biting its owner. He thought that she would not answer, but Pei Chi said softly, "Tang Yu, do you want to commit a crime?" His body froze completely. He narrowed his eyes and straightened his body. His voice was even hoarser. Chi-Chi, are you sure? She had to bear the consequences of teasing a man who had not had sex for half a month. Pei Chi-Chi nibbled on his neck and let out a soft "N." He could not take it anymore. He carried her from behind and placed her on the spacious conference table. She was a little uneasy. She wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his chest. She called out like a kitten, "Tang Yu. Be good. I'm here." He kissed her little neck and comforted her. When she slowly relaxed, he pushed her toward the wooden desk with one hand. She was lying on the huge desk. Her back was cold, and in front of her was his burning gaze. She felt very hot and ashamed. She closed her eyes, and her body was gently trembling for the upcoming sex. "Open your eyes." He leaned over and supported himself with one hand to prevent himself from pressing on her. He kissed her little mouth coaxingly. "Chi-Chi, I want you to see how we are together." Her body was still trembling slightly. She closed her eyes and trembled helplessly. He raised his hand and resolutely, one by one, removed all of her. She was a little regretful and afraid. At this moment, she was weak both physically and mentally. "Tang Yu." She called his name softly, and there was a trace of moisture in her eyes. "I'm scared." She was afraid of losing it, so she held on to it with all her might. Her long hair was spread on the dark logs, and her body was tender like a newborn baby. Tang Yu looked at her like this. His body was hot, but his heart was calm. He kissed her as if he had a lifetime to do this. She was afraid, so he hugged her and kept coaxing her. He kept telling her, "It's okay." He told her, "Chi-Chi, I'm here." He did not know what he touched, but the bright lights in the conference room dimmed. In that dimness, her vulnerability and his gaze became eternal. In her trembling, they became one. In the slow and ancient melody, it slowly told of love and his deep feelings. "Pei Chi-Chi, you are my constant expectation." Chapter 963. In the afternoon, Pei Chi-Chi went to a place that she thought she would never go to in her life. Shinjongshan and Mrs. Shin's residence. Tang Yu accompanied her there. He drove with one hand and held her hand with the other. His palm was warm, not as cold as hers. Pei Chi-Chi pursed her lips. After his car stopped, she said softly, "Tang Yu, let's go back." After all, Mrs. Shin was there. She didn't think it was a good idea. Tang Yu interlocked his fingers with hers and smiled. "Why did you change your mind?" Pei Chi-Chi pursed her lips and said after a long time, "I'm afraid that Mrs. Shin will be unhappy." Also, she would deal with Shin Lian later. It wasn't a good idea to go there now. Tang Yu reached out and touched her little head. "Don't think too much. It's just a private visit." Pei Chi-Chi nodded. She was very obedient, which reminded Tang Yu of someone. Pei Huan. Recently, he had seen Pei Huan and Lao Ken a few times. Pei Huan was like this in front of Lao Kansas. Had his Chi-Chi reflected on herself? Did she think that girls should be gentler? Thinking of her cold attitude towards him before, Tang Yu's heart was a little cold. He opened the car door and patted her little hand. "Don't stay there. Get out, be good." She nodded again and got out of the car with him. Tang Yu took out a gift box from the trunk and gave it to Mrs. Shin to nourish her body. As far as he knew, Mrs. Shin did not have a good life in the past few days. Her mental state was not very good, and most of the Shin family's finances were in Shin Lian's hands. The servants were also slowly reduced, and everything was done by Mrs. Shin, including taking care of Shinjongshan. Pei Chi-Chi's mood now was the same as Tang Xian's when she met Lin Yun. She was a little scared. Tang Yu almost knocked on the door with his little lamb. He had to prevent her from running away. Pei Chi stared at him with resentment in her eyes. Tang Yu knocked on the door and waited for a minute before the door opened. It was Mrs. Shen who opened the door. When her slightly aged eyes looked at Pei Chi, many emotions flashed through them. Pei Chi bit her lip and called her auntie softly. In the past, her mother, Zhao Ku, was Shen Zhongshan's third son who had been raised outside. Zhao Ku's existence had deeply hurt Mrs. Shen's feelings, so it was impossible for her to act as if nothing had happened. If it was the Mrs. Shen of the past, she would definitely not be able to remain calm. However, in the past 2 years, she had already calmed down a lot. She only hoped that Shen Zhongshan would be safe and that Shen Lian would turn over a new leaf. Mrs. Shen looked at Pei Chi for a long time before saying softly, "Come in." Pei Chi grabbed Tang Yu's arm, her fingers almost digging into his flesh. Tang Yu looked at her with a smile that wasn't a smile, then put his arm around her shoulders and walked in. Shen Zhongshan was sitting on the sofa drinking tea. His eyes were clear, but his body was still fat. He wouldn't be able to change it in a short period of time. "Uncle Shen." Tang Yu stood in front of Shen Zhongshan and smiled faintly. Shen Zhongshan looked up at the young man in front of him with admiration in his eyes. No matter what, Tang Yu was always extremely calm. On the contrary, his good-for-nothing daughter was far from being a match for him. Tang Yu's patience was enough to defeat all the advantages that Shen Lian had. At this point, it wasn't strange that Shen Lian had spat out 20% of Xing Yuan's power. Shen Zhongshan responded with a grunt, then shifted his gaze to his little daughter. Chapter 964. Everything was actually his fault. What did it have to do with her? Shen Zhongshan instructed Mrs. Shen, "Su Xin, go and pour 2 cups of tea for the Dahong Pao I've kept for years." Then he paused and smiled helplessly, "Look at my memory. I've already moved here. There's no Dahong Pao." But Mrs. Shen still magically came over. When they were moving, as long as it was something that he loved, she would move over with him. Shen Zhongshan was extremely touched. Mrs. Shen put down the tea. She probably knew that the atmosphere here was strange and it wasn't convenient for them to talk, so she found an excuse to go to the bedroom. When she left, not only Pei Chi, but Shen Zhongshan was also relieved. After all, it was already very good for Su Xin to be like this. He couldn't make things difficult for her anymore. Pei Chi and Tang Yu sat down under Shen Zhongshan's gesture. Tang Yu reached out and touched her little head. "Chi, you drank the tea and didn't greet anyone." Pei Chi tilted her head and looked at him. There was a touch of sadness in her eyes. Why was he always against her today? But Tang Yu only chuckled and stroked her hair again. Pei Chi had no choice but to softly call out to Uncle Shen. Shen Zhongshan's eyebrows twitched. He would be lying if he said he wasn't disappointed. Pei Chi was the daughter he liked the most. Compared to Tang Xian, he liked Pei Chi even more. As for Shen Lian, it was needless to say. Just based on what she had done, it was already good enough to keep her alive. Tang Yu looked at Pei Chi, "Huh?" Pei Chi's little hand secretly pinched his thigh. He was so bad. Tang Yu acted as though he couldn't feel the pain. He smiled and looked at her. Pei Chi had no choice but to softly call out, "Daddy." Her voice was so soft that only her lips could be seen moving, but to Shen Zhongshan, this was already the ultimate salvation. At this moment, he didn't have any resentment towards Zhao Ku and became peaceful. He didn't respond. He just looked at Pei Chi with the gentle gaze of a loving father. Pei Chi was uncomfortable. She wanted to look away but she couldn't. Because there might not be many opportunities like this. Shen Zhongshan's brain was injured. No one could guarantee how many times he could be awake. Her gaze was a bit distressed. Shin Zhongshan could guess what the little girl was thinking. He sighed slightly and then changed his expression. He said to Tang Yu with a bit of a brisk tone, "Bring the chessboard over. I haven't played in a long time. My hands are stuffy." Tang Yu with a smile. He took it and the two played seriously. The two played seriously. Chi Tang Yu. With Pei was with him. With Pei with him. With Pei. The intimacy of the young couple made Shin Zhongshan smile. He and Su Axian didn't seem to have such a good time. When he was young, he was addicted to Zhao Ke's body for a long time. He was very gentle to her. But this gentleness was only because of her body and not his heart. Shin Zhongshan put down the chess piece and said calmly, "Chi, go to the kitchen and cut a plate of fruit. Your Aunt Shin just bought a honeydew melon this morning. It's quite sweet." Pei Chi looked up and looked at Shin Zhongshan in surprise. Then, she stood up mechanically and went to the kitchen to cut the honeydew melon. In the simple living room, Shin Zhongshan played chess while talking to Tang Yu. This girl is quite obedient. Is she usually like this? Tang Yu grinned. I'm obedient most of the time. Chapter 965. Shin Zhongshan smiled and didn't say anything else. Pei Chi came out with fruits and placed them between them. Tang Yu took a piece while Shin Zhongshan didn't move. Pei Chi looked at him. You've been pretending to be crazy for 2 years. I'm about to puke from eating too much. Shin Zhongshan said calmly. Pei Chi looked at his figure and thought that he probably cared a lot about his figure. She didn't force it and took a small piece herself. After playing chess for half a day, Mrs. Shin came out and said that she was going to cook and asked them to stay for dinner. Pei Chi didn't dare to. Mrs. Shin just smiled and went to the kitchen. Shin Zhongshan continued to play chess calmly and said calmly, "If you can help your aunt." Shin Zhongshan said, "Your aunt comes from a good family and lived a good life after marriage. I'm afraid the food she cooks won't taste good. Just make do with it." Thinking about it, Su Axian had suffered a lot. Although he had a lot of money on hand, it was good to have a simple life. At least he was on a diet. Pei Chi nodded and said instinctively, "Then I'll go help." Tang Yu put down a piece and looked in the direction of the kitchen. He said to Shin Zhongshan, "Chi-Chi's cooking is good." Shin Zhongshan looked over and saw Pei Chi talking to Mrs. Shin. Her little face seemed to be trying to please her. It was quite heart-wrenching. Shin Zhongshan looked at her and his eyes became hot. This child was like him. She could be gentle and strong. He smiled with satisfaction. My daughter, how could she be wrong? Tang Yu continued to play chess with him. He was also absent-minded. The two men played while paying attention to the movements in the kitchen. On the other side, Mrs. Shin wanted to escape from the kitchen. She was so old, but she was defeated by a young girl in her early 20s. Look at how she cut the vegetables. The stir-frying looked and smelled good. And the thick soup was so fragrant that she wanted to drink 2 bowls. Mrs. Shin hadn't had a decent meal in a long time since all the servants in the family had been laid off. Now that she smelled it and looked at it, she was so touched that she wanted to cry. Pei Chi looked at her and swallowed hard. After Mrs. Shin's excitement, she calmed down and became very indifferent. All right, tell your father and Tang Yu to wash their hands and eat. Pei Chi replied with an "oh" and went to call someone. Then, she came back to help Mrs. Shin serve the dishes. Mrs. Shin felt a little emotional in her heart. Zhao Ke's child was not bad. He was even more considerate than her own daughter. At the thought of Shin Lian, she felt suffocated in her heart and her expression softened a little. However, when Mrs. Shin saw the dishes on the table, Chongshan sat there and smiled. Mrs. Shin's heart was instantly healed. Shin Chongshan was very happy. He had not drunk for a long time. In fact, he could not drink, so he asked Mrs. Shin to open a bottle of red wine for Tang Yu. Pei Chi-Chi did not touch it. She had to drive for Tang Yu later. Shin Chongshan was very happy. For the first time, he ate an extra bowl of rice. Mrs. Shen was very ashamed, so she ate 2 more bowls. Tang Yu noticed it all along. He glanced at his little Chi-Chi and felt very proud. Pei Chi-Chi looked at the 2 Shens. Weren't they rich? Why were they acting like African refugees now? Mrs. Shen was a little embarrassed. She scooped another bowl of rice, but before she could eat, she looked at the last bowl of soup. It was not bad to use it to make rice. Chapter 966. Mrs. Shen's face froze as she looked at Shin Chongshan. Shin Chongshan spat out the food in his mouth and it flowed down the corner of his mouth. It looked dirty and messy, and his expression turned blank. Definitely an Oscar-level acting. Just then, the door opened and Shin Lian walked in. She stood at the door and looked at the people inside. Her gaze slowly shifted to the dining table. It looked very sumptuous. Even though they were almost done eating, they looked happy and harmonious. Shin Lian placed her bag at the entrance and looked at them. She scoffed coldly. Why didn't you call me for a family reunion? Isn't my surname Shin? Shin Chongshan was still chewing the food in his mouth mechanically. His mouth opened and closed. Miss is here. Shin Lian walked over slowly and sat beside Shin Chongshan. Her voice was gentle. Dad, let me feed you, okay? Look, you're eating everywhere. Is it because my mom didn't take good care of you? With that said, she looked up at Mrs. Shen and smiled strangely. Mom, go back with Dad. I'll take good care of you. Mrs. Shen's voice was stern. What do you want? Your father and I will not go back. You should give up on this idea. Shin Lian looked around and chuckled. Look, living in a place like this, you haven't bought anything for 2 years. Is this an extra meal today? Mom, are you sure you want to bring my dad to live like this? Shin Lian's eyes were cold. Mrs. Shen was so angry that her entire body was trembling. She glared at Shin Lian. You bastard. You harmed your dad and now you're doing such a disgraceful thing. Shin Lian scoffed coldly. Mom, you can eat whatever you want but you can't say whatever you want. Mrs. Shen pointed at her and almost fainted. Pei Chi-Chi was about to speak when Tang Yu tugged at her, gesturing for her not to say anything. He stood up, looked at Shin Lian, and smiled faintly. I wanted to visit Uncle Shin and Aunt Shin. They are indeed suffering. But Shin Lian, where have you been for the past 2 years? Shin Lian narrowed her eyes and glared at Tang Yu. Tang Yu continued, just now, you said that we shouldn't talk nonsense, right? Shin Lian raised her head. Yes. Does Mr. Tang have any advice for me? Tang Yu looked at her and said, it's true that we don't have any evidence that you gave Uncle Shin that kind of medicine. At that time, Auntie Shin didn't sue you because of the relationship between the 2 of you. But Shin Lian, the difference between humans and animals is human nature. What you've done in the past 2 years is practically inhumane. What right do you have to criticize me? Do you have any proof? Shin Lian sneered. In fact, her heart was trembling. Tang Yu must have known something for him to act like this. Sure enough, Tang Yu's gaze was deep, and he smiled faintly. Shin Lian, what you did to Uncle Shin in the hospital was recorded by the surveillance camera. I have at least 3 or 4 copies of the video, and each of them is enough to sue you so that you can never get close to Uncle Shin and the rest of them for the rest of your life. Shen Lian's expression changed drastically, and she stared at Tang Yu. Her blood froze. It turned out that Tang Yu had known all the time that she had done all these crazy things. Shen Lian laughed, and tears fell from her eyes. Her voice was very soft. Yes, I'm a bad person. I did it to him, and I often want to strangle him. Her expression became crazy. Look, he has always been like this. He's stupid, and he's still thinking about the bastard outside. She looked at the dishes on the table. Did Pei Chi cook it? Chapter 967. Because her pampered mother would never be able to cook such delicious food. Pei Chi, what do you want now? You snatched away Tang Yu and my shares. Now, you want to lie to my parents and take away Jean Taihe. Shen Lian glared at Pei Chi, her eyes filled with hatred. Pei Chi's eyes were filled with hatred. If not for Pei Chi's appearance, everything would have been fine. Even if Tang Yu didn't love her, even if he couldn't touch her, he couldn't touch anyone else. But you appeared. You took away everything that belonged to me and made me so miserable. Shen Lian turned to Tang Yu. And you set up a car accident and took away my leg. Ha ha ha, I'm a useless person now, so you don't want me, right? Mrs. Shen's eyes were filled with confusion. She had never known what Shen Lian was talking about. Tang Yu was still very calm. Just like what you said just now, you can't talk nonsense. Shen Lian, things without any evidence are slander. Shen Lian raised her head. I'm not as clever as you, to be able to lie to me for 2 years and get this bastard back. To think that she could still love you so much after having an abortion. Tang Yu, I admit defeat. Tang Yu's eyes darkened. Pei Chi held his hand, silently calming his anger. Finally, he said coldly, I will take Uncle Shen and Auntie Shen away. Shen Lian, you're on your own. Shen Lian was stunned. Then she looked at Mrs. Shen. Mom, you're leaving with him. With someone who has nothing to do with you. Look carefully, Pei Chi is Zhao Ke's daughter. Have you forgotten the past? Have you forgotten how Shen Zhongshan treated us? Mrs. Shen looked at her hysterical expression and said calmly, I'll leave with Tang Yu. Shen Lian, stop. Shen Lian was stunned for a while before she murmured, Mom, you don't want me anymore. You want to be Pei Chi's mother, don't you? Are you going to be snatched away by her too? She pulled the tablecloth off the table, and the dishes fell to the ground with a crash. Some of the shards flew and cut her leg. It was painful, and blood flowed down. But Mrs. Shen was unmoved. She looked at her beloved daughter and said firmly, yes. Mrs. Shen smiled bitterly and refused to talk to her anymore. Otherwise, your father's life will be in your hands. Shen Lian was beyond saving. Mrs. Shen told Tang Yu to look after Shen Zhongshan and went to the bedroom to pack. Actually, it was just clothes. She had gotten used to living a simple life for the past 2 years and didn't need any fancy clothes or jewelry. She packed a large suitcase and dragged it outside. Pei Chi had already wiped the corner of Shen Zhongshan's mouth clean. Mrs. Shen looked at Shen Lian again and said calmly, take care of yourself in the future. Shen Lian asked in a daze, Mom, are you going to cut ties with me? If so, will you repent? Mrs. Shen closed her eyes, hoping for the last time. But Shen Lian laughed softly. Her laughter was extremely mournful. Mom, are you joking? You want me to repent? What did I do wrong? It's clearly all of you who let me down. Mrs. Shen's heart was cold. She opened her eyes again and supported Shen Zhongshan calmly. Zhongshan, let's go. Shen Zhongshan followed her obediently. Tang Yu helped them pack their luggage, and Pei Chi followed. Chapter 968. Before Mrs. Shen left, she looked back at the house, which held her best and most painful memories. Shen Lian was still standing there, murmuring, "Mom." Mrs. Shen just looked at her deeply, turned around, and left. The door closed. The bright lights in the room, the mess on the floor, and Shen Lian stood there alone. Shen Lian stood there, looking as lonely as a child. Her world was an isolated island, and she was a bird on the island. She couldn't even find a place to rest. Tears fell from her delicate face, but she didn't wipe them away. She just said softly, "You want me to turn back, you want me to stop. But I can't turn back, I can't stop. I can't accept it. Everything I have was taken away by Pei Chi." Shen Lian laughed softly. Looking at the scattered food on the floor, she murmured, "How long have I been eating alone? I've always been alone." She picked up the bottle of red wine and poured it into her mouth. Then she opened another bottle and drank as much as she could. It was good to be drunk. When she was drunk, she didn't have to think about what she had lost, but the sobriety she had when she was drunk was the most fatal. She began to sing, scream, and say crazy things. She began to smash things in the house, smashing everything that could be smashed. After smashing, everything would be fine, and there would be nothing left. Everything would be clean. The neighbor called the police. An hour later, Shen Lian was taken away by the police and taken to the hospital for a breathalyzer test. Shen Lian was still drunk. She screamed and cried. Her face was full of tears and snot. The police couldn't do anything to her, because as soon as they touched Shen Lian, she would scream. After about 2 hours, Shen Lian was not as crazy as before. She lay there, murmuring Zhang Hengyuan's name. "Is he your boyfriend?" The police didn't recognize Mr. Shin from Jin Taihe in B City and asked helplessly. At this time, a hospital staff recognized Shen Lian. "Oh, Dr. Zhang is her attending doctor." But, the police officer thought about it. "This person is very unstable. Why don't we call Dr. Zhang over?" The young nurse chuckled a few more times before she slowly said, "Dr. Zhang resigned because of his work style." The policeman was quite disappointed. How could this be? Doctors nowadays are all like this. The young nurse was not afraid of trouble. She mumbled, "Dr. Zhang's character is very good. Wasn't he seduced by her?" After having a good time, she took off her pants and said that Dr. Zhang's medical ethics are bad. If Dr. Zhang isn't a good doctor, there won't be any good doctors. It just so happened that the police had brought along an accompanying official reporter, who happened to record the scene. Next to them, Shen Lian was shouting Zhang Hengyuan's name loudly. All kinds of words revealed that the two sides had an improper relationship. The young nurse was also shrewish and knew how to stir up trouble. Everyone in the hospital felt indignant for Dr. Zhang. There were so many young and beautiful female doctors and nurses in the hospital. Was there a need for Dr. Zhang to deceive a woman who was missing a leg and resign voluntarily? He clearly liked her, but was this kind of love worth it? The young nurse felt very indignant. She took out her phone and called Zhang Hengyuan. "Dr. Zhang, Shen Lian is making a scene in the hospital. Do you want to come and take a look?" It was a good opportunity to expose. Was Dr. Zhang pestering Shen Lian, or was it Shen Lian pestering Dr. Zhang and then throwing him away after using him? Chapter 969. From the elevator to the consultation room, it was packed with people. The nurses on duty, doctors, and even the patients were watching the commotion. Shen Lian's identity was also exposed. Everyone was shocked. How could such a rich woman be so crazy? It turned out that rich people had their own troubles. It was not as glamorous as it seemed on the outside. Zhang Hingyuan looked solemn. He had one hand in his pocket. He was wearing a pair of trousers, a white knitted shirt, and a black windbreaker. When he walked over, the police officer was very polite. "Are you Miss Shen's attending doctor?" Zhang Hingyuan replied calmly, "I'm not a doctor anymore. I'm here in my private capacity." As he said that, he looked at the nurse who was on the phone. The nurse immediately hid. The police officer smiled. Someone called the police and said that Miss Shen was a nuisance. "We saw that she was drunk and brought her here. Nothing serious happened. Just be careful in the future. After all, she's a celebrity and it's not good. Dr. Zhang, when she sobers up, just give us an explanation." Zhang Hingyuan nodded. "Okay, I will." Then, he paid the fine. Before the police left, he looked at the crowd. "Disperse. Protect the privacy of others." After saying that, he left. The people who were watching the commotion also dispersed. Shen Lian was lying on the examination table. Her long curly hair spread out on the white pillow, revealing her angelic face. However, Zhang Hingyuan had already experienced that she had a devil's heart. He was still standing and said calmly, "If you're awake, go and wash your face. I'll send you back." Shen Lian did not move. Her voice was very soft. "Hingyuan, I know you won't leave me alone." If he had not experienced it before, he would really think that she was sincere. However, how could Shen Lian be sincere? Her sincerity was all for hatred. Zhang Hingyuan's expression was still very calm, but it showed his forbearance. "Consider it over. This is the last time I care about you." In the past, he had been to her. No matter who she loved in her heart, no matter how much she had in the past, no matter how broken she was, as long as she was willing, he would be there. He was at fault for the absurdity of that night. But her viciousness had hurt him. At first, he thought that he would at least be a friend of hers. However, after sleeping with her once, he realized that she only treated him as a tool that could be used anywhere. After using him, she could discard him. His feelings were not important to her at all. At that time, his masculine pride was ruthlessly trampled by her. Shen Lian's eyes were blurred. "I don't believe it. I don't believe that you won't care about me. I know you love me, don't you? There are some things that can't be supported by feelings. Shen Lian, I can only choose to give up." Zhang Hingyuan's hands were still in his pockets. "I'll be going to Canada next month. I might be immigrating and won't be coming back." He looked at her dazed expression and turned to call a nurse over. "Get her a ward. I'll settle the bill tomorrow." With that, he turned around to leave. Shen Lian was stunned. She sat up and screamed at his back, "Why didn't you take me away? I want to go home with you." The young nurses were eavesdropping and looked at him in disdain. Zhang Hingyuan stopped, but he did not look back. His voice was a little hoarse. "I won't sleep with you again. Shen Lian, last time was our second time. The first time was when you were drunk at the bar. You must have forgotten about it." Telling her could be considered a kind of closure, and also an explanation for this absurd secret love of his. Chapter 970. On the other side, Tang Yu arranged for Shen Zhongshan and Mrs. Shen to stay in a villa in the suburbs. There was a temporary guard at the door, so that Shen Lian could not harass them anymore. Mrs. Shen was very grateful, but when they left, she wanted to say something but hesitated. It was not convenient for Pei Chi-Chi, so Tang Yu had to step in. He let Pei Chi-Chi get in the car first, looked at Mrs. Shen, and said slowly, "Uncle Shen said that he would send her abroad. I will respect his decision." Mrs. Shen was in tears. Finally, Chongshan still cared about their father-daughter relationship, but Shen Lian kept making mistakes. Seeing that Mrs. Shen was crying, Tang Yu took a tissue and said, "Aunt Shen, don't be too sad." Mrs. Shen was sobbing. In the end, it was Shen Zhongshan who brought her upstairs. Tang Yu went outside, opened the door, and got in the car. When he was fastening the seatbelt, Pei Chi came over and whispered, "I think I heard Aunt Shen crying." He nodded and fastened the seatbelt. Then, he raised his hand and rubbed her hair. He smiled and said, "Mrs. Shen has had a hard time in the past 2 years. Chi, you don't mind, do you?" Pei Chi was stunned and asked him subconsciously, "What do you mind?" Tang Yu looked at her for a while, touched his head, but did not say anything. Instead, he started the car. Pei Chi saw that he was driving in the direction of the rose garden. She put her hand on the back of his hand and said, "How are we going there?" "Pei Chi, we are going to make love now. Do you want to do it in the car instead of going home?" Mr. Tang looked very natural, as if he was buying cabbage on the street. She was stunned, and then her breathing was a little chaotic. She stammered, "Who wants to do it with you?" She was too embarrassed to say that word. Tang Yu patted her little hand and said happily, "Pei Chi. I'm not going to do it with you," she denied very seriously. Tang Yu drove with one hand and paid attention to the situation in front of him. He took the time to tease his little pet. "Pei Chi, do you dare to say that you don't want to do it with me? So tell me, who do you want to do it with?" He was truly shameless. Pei Chi did not utter a single word. She turned her face away and looked out of the window. In the end, she even wound down the window to cool herself down. Her face was too hot. Tang Yu smiled, his voice low and hoarse. "What if I say, Xiaoxin is also there?" Pei Chi turned her head abruptly and looked at him in disbelief. She softly called out, "Tang Yu. Will you now?" He asked briskly. Pei Chi hugged his arm and said sweetly, "Tang Yu, you're the best." Mr. Tang was still serious. "Pei Chi, let's talk about this tonight." Pei Chi did not understand his words at first, but she understood at night. It was a painful realization. The car slowly drove into the rose garden. As soon as they got out, the little maid came forward and whispered, "Madam, little miss, and little master are all asleep." Seeing Pei Chi's surprise, Tang Yu pulled her upstairs and explained, "In order to prevent people from guessing, I invited my mother to stay for 2 days. Otherwise, it would be risky to always pick up Xiaoxin alone." Pei Chi made an "oh" sound and was a little dejected because Xiaoxin had fallen asleep. Tang Yu looked at her and smiled as he pinched her little face. "You can go and take a look." Her eyes lit up again and she obediently went upstairs with him. When they reached the door, Tang Yu first knocked on the door and then quietly opened it. Chapter 971. Although he had gotten married and had children in the past 2 years, he had not changed this habit before going to bed. This put a lot of pressure on Zhao Yi. In fact, he was not interested in this Buddhist scripture at all. When he talked to her before, it was only because she liked it. After getting married, it was more. Sometimes, he desired his wife's body, but after taking a shower, he felt guilty when he saw the Buddhist scriptures in his wife's hands. He wondered if he was too sensual. At this moment, the 2 babies were sleeping beside her. They were very cute. Pei Chi looked at them from the side. She wanted to carry Xiaoxin to her room immediately, but she did not dare to act rashly by Lin Yun's side. At the same time, under the dim yellow light, she saw that Lin Yun's brows were a little tired. She felt guilty and grateful. Lin Yun was in her 50s and it was difficult for her to take care of 2 children. Moreover, Xiaoxin was born prematurely and her body was very weak. Pei Chi-Chi's heart softened. She squatted down and looked at the 2 babies. They were both white and chubby. They were both very well. She looked up and held Lin Yun's calf. She said softly, "Mom, thank you." Lin Yun put down the Buddhist scriptures in her hands and smiled, "Silly child, there's no need to thank me." Her fingers stroked the young girl's black hair. Her eyes were bright and beautiful. She was only in her early 20s. The more she looked at her, the better she looked, let alone her son. Pei Chi-Chi looked at the 2 fat little dumplings. The 2 babies' breaths had a milky smell. Her heart was extremely soft. She also softened her voice, "They are so cute." Lin Yun smiled, "If Xiaoxin is not my granddaughter, it would be a good match." Pei Chi-Chi did not expect Lin Yun to make such a joke. She was stunned for a moment. Lin Yun smiled, "Do you want to carry Xiaoxin upstairs?" "Okay." This was what Pei Chi-Chi said. "No." This was what Tang Yu said. Lin Yun unconsciously looked at her son and shook her head. How could she not know her son? He usually looked very serious, but he had no integrity at the crucial moment. Today, he invited her as a guest, presumably with bad intentions. Look, the little girl was tricked into coming back. Tang Yu probably knew what his mother was thinking. He coughed lightly and said, "Mom, I won't wake Xiaoxin up. Let's see tomorrow morning. Good night." As he spoke, he held Pei Chi-Chi's hand and walked out. Actually, Pei Chi-Chi was a little resistant. She still wanted to carry Xiaoxin upstairs to sleep with them, but at this time, Tang Yu couldn't bear it anymore. He quickened his steps, opened the door, and closed it. "Tang Yu." Pei Chi-Chi was a little annoyed and called him lightly. But just as she cried out, her little face was cupped by him, and her body was pressed against the heavy door. His lips covered her little mouth, and it only took him a second to pry it open. She shook her little head, her eyes shimmering with tears under the dim light, looking pitiful. But the more fragile she was, the more it aroused his desire to conquer her. He pressed her against the door, squeezed her long legs in the middle, and just a lift was enough to torture her. She would rather die than live. Being kissed so intensely by him, his big palms also trembled. She bloomed in his palms, her little mouth moaned, but she did not dare to struggle with all her might. Lin Yun and the 2 babies were sleeping on the other side of the door. Chapter 972. He looked at her flirtatious expression and pinched her chin gently. "Let's go back to the bedroom, okay?" Pei Chi-Chi shook her head and whimpered, "No." But when she said no, he leaned forward and said slowly, "Chi-Chi, keep your voice down later." Her eyes widened as he started to unbutton his shirt with one hand. She closed her eyes in fear and screamed, "No." Luckily, he covered her mouth in time so that Lin Yun couldn't hear her. Tang Yu didn't say anything but just stared at her with his clear eyes. Pei Chi-Chi bit her lip and looked at him helplessly. Then, she broke free from his hand and hugged his neck obediently. She said softly, "Let's go back to the room." He smiled, reached out to pick up his little girl, and walked towards their bedroom. The short time in the conference room during the day really couldn't comfort him. He carried her to the balcony of the bedroom and turned on the night light. The light was dense and the atmosphere was warm. He pressed her against the sofa and kissed her. She fell onto the sofa and he slowly lowered his body. As they kissed, they took off each other's clothes. Soon, they fell to the ground. Just as the arrow was knocked on the bowstring, an unknown creature came over and covered Tang Yu's eyes with its little hand. It called out, "Daddy," in a crisp voice. Tang Yu closed his eyes and cursed softly. And when Pei Chi opened her blurry eyes, she saw Shao Qi at the Marvel conference. Why was Shao Qi here? The robot, Shao Qi, also looked at Pei Chi in confusion. Who was this? Why was she in her and Daddy's bedroom? Almost at the same time, Pei Chi 7 and Shao Qi said together, "Why is she here?" Tang Yu was still leaning on Pei Chi, his voice husky. He didn't want Shao Qi to see what she shouldn't see. Even if she was just a robot, it was better not to teach children bad things like this. Also, damn it, why didn't anyone tell him that Manager Lin had repaired Little 7 and sent him back? He even let Shao Qi see him and Pei Chi making love. I need your explanation. Pei Chi and Shao Qi spoke at the same time. After saying that, Pei Chi stared at the robot, a little shocked that the robot's thinking was exactly the same as hers. No matter how accurate the data was, it was impossible to achieve this because the human brain was so complex, and Marvel's chip was so terrifying. She was frightened. But at the same time, she was angry. Even though Shao Qi was imitating her, it wasn't her. She wanted to ask what Tang Yu had done with Shao Qi, but before she could, Shao Qi said, "Before you, Daddy always hugged me to sleep." Pei Chi gritted her teeth and glared at Tang Yu. Really? Tang Yu closed his eyes and rubbed against her again reluctantly. His face was buried in her neck, and the tip of his slightly cold nose touched her delicate skin. Chi, don't care about the child. He wanted to continue, but Pei Chi pushed him away. Shameless. She used her clothes to cover herself, and Shao Qi stared straight at Daddy's body. Her brain was doing precise calculations. Daddy was 30% longer than the average length of a human. Long live Daddy. Daddy was amazing. Tang Yu was helpless. He turned around and switched off Shao Qi's power. Chapter 973. Tang Yu coughed lightly. She's just a kid. Pei Chi leaned against the sofa and looked at him. She said that you hugged her to sleep. Tang Yu smiled. How is that possible? He propped himself up, kissed her and coaxed her. You can't believe a kid's words. She accepted his kiss and said in a cold voice, but I feel that a kid's words are the truest, not to mention a robot that doesn't have any ulterior motives. She hugged his neck with her little hands and breathed out. Tang Yu, have you ever done it with her? Tang Yu's expression became extremely uncomfortable and he bit her little lips seductively. Silly, how could I? Little Chi didn't do it either. Here, and here. His finger pointed at every place he said. Pei Chi couldn't stand it at all. She gritted her teeth and looked at him. He was really too shameless. Pei Chi bit her lip and stared at him. The moisture in her eyes almost made him drown in it. He moved closer to her ear and said in a very low voice, Chi, are you jealous? Of course not. She snorted and turned her face to the side. His lips touched hers gently. He asked again, Chi. She didn't say a word and looked at him as if she was looking at a pervert. Tang Yu smiled and nibbled her little shoulder. His voice was low and husky. I promise I didn't do it with little Chi. How about it? He paused for a moment and smiled even more wantonly. Chi, do you want to check? Before she could react, he took her little hand and walked over. Pei Chi was embarrassed and angry. He was shameless. She stared at him with tears in her eyes while he kissed her little face and comforted her. The night was cold. On the balcony, he was passionate as he pestered her again and again. Early in the morning, when Pei Chi woke up, there was a fat little guy lying on her. Big sister, the little guy spat out a mouthful of saliva and climbed up from her waist. His speed was super fast, just like the little guy in the cartoon. Pei Chi grabbed onto that chubby little arm. When she opened her mouth, her voice was a little hoarse. Has the baby eaten? Baby has eaten, but grandma hasn't drunk. Xiaoxin said, looking at her longingly. Pei Chi was lying on the big bed with her clothes unbuttoned. She cautiously pulled up her clothes and turned her head. She was surprised to see that Tang Yu had not woken up either. Probably knowing what she was thinking, Tang Yu smiled and said, Pei Chi, I'm exhausted. She stuffed the little boy into his arms. Xiaoxin's heart should be broken. He leaned against the headboard and let Xiaoxin sit on his stomach. He chuckled, I think this habit of hers is quite good. As he said that, he actually reached out and felt it. He smiled and said, don't you feel like, well, it feels better. This was all thanks to Xiaoxin. As a father, he kissed Xiaoxin's little face as a reward. Pei Chi felt a chill and was ready to get up to brush her teeth and wash her face. With Lin Yun around, she always felt that it was not good to sleep in. However, she had only moved a little when Tang Yu reached out and pulled her back into his arms. Lie down for a while more. Pei Chi was about to speak when her phone rang. She took a look at it and saw that it was Pei Huan calling. She looked at Tang Yu and picked up the phone. Her body also propped up a little. Pei Huan's unhappy voice was on the other side of the phone. Chi, didn't you say that you would accompany me to try on a wedding dress? Only then did Pei Chi remember that Pei Huan had mentioned it to her 2 days ago, but she had forgotten it. Chapter 974. Pei Chi glanced at him. In fact, she was also hesitant because she didn't want to give up Xiaoxin. They hadn't seen each other for a long time, and they didn't spend much time together last night, but Pei Huan begged, Chi, I'm here, but Lao Can is still on the way. Come with me. Think about it, an unmarried and pregnant girl feels so helpless and pitiful at this time. Pei Chi was speechless and gave her a blow. You're a young woman who lost her marriage, and soon you'll be a woman again. Pei Huan cried, Pei Chi, you're so annoying. But Pei Huan, you're quite cute when you're angry. Pei Chi chuckled and looked at Tang Yu's slightly gloomy eyes. I'll be there in a while. She thought about it. Pei Huan had no relatives now, and marrying Lao Ken might be Pei Huan's last marriage. She'd better accompany her. After hanging up the phone, Tang Yu naturally objected, and Xiaoxin refused to let go of her. Okay, Xiaoxin, I'll come again next time. She kissed the chubby little girl and returned her to Tang Yu. Although Tang Yu was resentful, he still stood up, I'll take you there. Pei Chi held him down, I'll ask Lao Zhao to take me there. You stay with Mom. She looked straight at him, calm and indifferent. Tang Yu lowered his head and looked at the hand she placed on the back of his hand. He smiled and said, all right then. He leaned over and kissed her, if I'm free at noon, I'll pick you up for lunch. She nodded and got up to tidy herself up. When she went out, she said goodbye to Lin Yun. Lin Yun was a little surprised to hear that Pei Huan was going to get married, but she also gave her blessings. It was already 10:30 when Pei Chi arrived at the wedding photography studio designated by Pei Huan. Pei Huan had already changed into a wedding dress. She looked at Pei Chi in the mirror, how is it? Pretty good. Pei Chi noticed that Pei Huan's belly seemed to be flat. Pei Huan looked around and was also satisfied, mainly because this dress was chosen for her by her husband. However, thinking of Lao Can, she was dissatisfied and complained, I have to attend an activity this morning. I said I would be there at 10 o'clock, but now I'm not here yet. Just then, the door was pushed open, and Lao Can rushed over. His forehead was full of sweat in late autumn, and his voice was hoarse. "I'm here." Pei Huan's face showed a touch of shyness. "That's right." Pei Chi was already used to the two of them acting all day long. She sat on the sofa to read a magazine and listen to the commotion. Old Can came over. Pei Huan hadn't seen him for 2 hours, so she naturally kissed him for a while. Pei Chi really felt that it was nauseating. Old Can, such a mighty man, had actually become sentimental like Pei Huan. After kissing for a while, Lao Can went to wash his face and change into a formal suit. He and Pei Huan were a perfect couple. Pei Chi was in charge of helping Pei Chi straighten her skirt and tidy up her clothes. Pei Huan was a little princess now, and she insisted that Pei Chi serve her, saying that she was pregnant. Xiao Mei couldn't stand it anymore. Fortunately, Pei Chi had a good temper, and she followed the noble pregnant woman's wishes. The photographers were all in position, and the pregnant woman said in a coquettish voice, "Lao Can, take 2 photos for me and the baby later." Pei Chi rolled her eyes. She was afraid that the whole world wouldn't know she was pregnant. Chapter 975. Xiao Mei was holding the phone for him. She looked at it with a complicated expression. "It's Su Mo." Pei Huan was unhappy. She fiddled with her skirt. "It's Old I. Hurry up and pick it up. Don't forget to tell her that we're getting married. Let her be a part of it." Old Ken was embarrassed in front of these people, so he coughed. "We'll talk about it when we get back. Look at you. You're already pregnant, but you're still so bad-tempered. Of course I'm not as understanding as your Su Mo." Pei Huan said sourly. She walked over to the sofa angrily. "I'm not taking any more photos." Old Ken had been with her for a long time. He knew that Pei Huan had a bad mouth, but she wasn't that unreasonable. He smiled and picked up the phone while looking at his future wife. However, his expression changed as he listened to her. It even became very ugly. The voice on the other end was very loud. He could hear Su Mo crying and screaming. Pei Huan's body tensed up and she sat up straight. Old Ken gripped his phone tightly and slowly scrolled down. He exuded an aura of horror, which was quite frightening to look at. He looked at Pei Huan and said softly, "Su Mo is in danger. I have to go." Pei Huan was stunned. She then said sternly, "Ken Mingzhu, today is the day we take our wedding photos." Old Can's expression was still very tense. "She's in danger. I have to go." As he said that, he untied his bow tie and threw it aside. Then, he picked up his car keys and walked out. He could still hear Su Mo's screams and cries of pain. That was the sound of pain that could only come from being raped, because he didn't want to remember the man's rough panting. Pei Huan cried. She stood there and called Ken Mingzhu's name again. He left just like that, without even a word of comfort. Even if he said that they would continue filming when he came back and that their wedding would not change, she would feel a little more at ease. Also, had it ever occurred to him that she, as his wife, would be worried if he went alone like this? He did not think about any of that. At that moment, there was only Su Mo in his heart. There was only his moonlight. Pei Huan closed her eyes and bit her lips. She did not say a word. However, his lower abdomen slowly started to hurt, and it started to hurt intermittently. She called out Old Can's name hoarsely. She closed her eyes, which were filled with pain. Lao Can had already walked to the door. When he heard Pei Huan's voice, he turned around and saw her pained expression. "Ken Mingzhu, my stomach hurts. Take me to the hospital," Pei Huan said in a hoarse voice as she held her stomach. Pei Chi was also frightened. She and Little Mei supported her on both sides and felt that Pei Huan's body was ice cold. A strand of fresh blood dyed her skirt red, making Pei Huan's face even paler. She looked at old Can and smiled gently. Can Mingzhu, you should go. If you go, our wedding will be cancelled, regardless of whether we can keep this child or not. Her body was trembling, she never knew that there would be such pain. This was far more painful than the pain that Jinrong had given her. Pei Huan shed tears as she looked at the man she fell in love with. She had thought that she had found someone to rely on for the rest of her life, but now, she was facing a miscarriage, and her man was still hesitating whether to save his first love first. She stared at Lao Can stubbornly, wanting him to make the decision. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.